All right, I think, oh, yes, I'm live. Um, all right, we're going to get started in a minute or two. And welcome, y'all, to the Fayetteville Public Library. This is a great resource here, and I'm really grateful that they give me the opportunity to do stuff like this here. One of the things about writing is that you do it all by yourself. So it's nice to be able to get out and interact with people. As if you didn't know already, my name's David Lee Holcomb. We were just talking about you. It was good things.
Oh, I was talking about how wonderful I thought you were. How good you were at what you did.
Sorry about being snarky and say you've got a kid and never thinks to talk about it.
So I'm a retired graphic designer from television news industry. I've written and published 3 novels, and I have a 4th in the oven. My 3rd novel, the most recent, is on the table back there. And before we start, let me say that usually I just improvise, but that can go all over the place. So tonight I have some guidelines to keep me on track so I don't wander off down some rabbit hole. I imagine most of you have somewhere to be between now and midnight. To give you an overview of what I'm going to be doing here tonight, I'm going to start by talking about my current novel, Strange News. I'll do a reading from it and talk a little bit about it. And after that, I will move on to talk about writing process generally, what I've experienced, how it's worked for me, what's worked, what hasn't. And some of the questions that I'll touch on are things like, why do people do this in the first place? Why do people write? How does a book get started? And how do you get it all the way to the end? Are there rules that you have to follow? And if so, what are they? Who gets to make them up? Do you need special tools or special software or certain physical capabilities? And something that I did not think about before I started my writing journey was, does starting something like this later in life have an impact on how you approach it? Because that, for me, has been a factor. And if you're still here after all that, I'll do a short reading from my current work in progress, and so then we'll do Q&A. This works like magic. To begin with, Strange Magic is my 3rd novel, which I find really amazing because I'm really good at starting things, but getting all the way to the end is not my forte. But I've done it 3 times. This is my first effort at fantasy. And I should clarify what I mean by that because that covers a multitude of sins. My book does not have wizards with flowing beards and posh British accents. There are no incestuous royal families slaughtering each other at weddings. I don't have any action heroes wielding swords, wearing furry jockstraps. I've never picked up a sword in my life and wouldn't have the first idea how you described that. My protagonist Selby Coates is just an ordinary guy of a certain age living an ordinary life. It's just him and his one-eyed rescue cat, Pancake. Selby rides the bus, he uses a cell phone, he has a laptop, he shops at the supermarket. Pancake eats Purina One cat food, chicken and salmon flavor. They're just ordinary. If there's anything out of the ordinary about Selby, it's his passion for pastries and also for bad movies. The kind of movies that we would sneak into at the drive-in when I was a kid. The Blob, Die Monster Die, Devil Girl from Mars, The Attack of the Crab Monsters, that stuff. Selby is crazy about that stuff. And it affects the way he sees the world and how he interprets things going on around him. So we first meet Selby as he is facing his 65th birthday, his last day of work, and possibly the last day of his life. Selby Coates died on his birthday. A remarkable coincidence, he thought, looking back. When Selby first signed on with the Buckley Herald-Star, boys on bicycles still bobbed the early news against suburban front doors every morning. Orange boxes on every downtown corner dispensed the late edition for 50 cents. Wednesday's paper was fat with coupons and grocery store inserts. Every Friday, the Herald-Star's entertainment section told its readers what movies to see, what restaurants to sample, and what concerts to attend. That had been more than 50 years ago. More than 30 years ago, I'm sorry. The Herald-Star, now Herald-Star Media, still produced a print newspaper on Sundays for the people who drank craft beer and brewed their morning coffee in a French press. But these days, the real news arrived via a slick website and a flock of email newsletters, all very modern, clean, and efficient. Selby Coates could read the writing on the wall. Paperboys on bikes were not essential to the new way of doing things, nor were aging entertainment critics obsessed with vintage drive-in movies. On the premise that it was better to jump than to be pushed, Selby gave notice that September 14th, his 65th birthday, would be his last day with the company. When the big day arrived, there was, of course, a party. The company laid out cupcakes and cheap champagne in the third-floor conference room at 5 o'clock. Selby's colleagues shook his hand and wished him well. There were even a few tears. Many of those he was leaving behind assumed he would soon drift untethered into senility and death. Little did they know. Around 5:45, as the festivities dragged to a close, DeQuinn Pitts walked up, holding a small box. "This is for you, Mr. Coates," he said. "What? For me? Thank you, DeQuinn." DeQuinn was the lobby security guard during regular business hours, Monday through Friday. He had been on the job for 3 years, and in all that time, Selby had never been able to speak to him without blushing and stammering. DeQuinn smiled. "I knew they'd get crappy cupcakes. They always do. So Jenny made some last night, and we wrapped one up for you." Selby opened the gilded cardboard box. Nested in orange tissue and swirls of icing, he glimpsed chocolate cake, rich and dark as tar. DeQuinn grinned and reached over to poke a candle into the elaborately fluted orange-pink crown. "The cupcake is for your last day, and the candle is for your birthday. I've enjoyed working with you, sir." Selby had been swilling cheap champagne for almost an hour. He looked at the cupcake and then at DeQuinn and couldn't think of a thing to say. He hoped he wasn't going to embarrass himself. "You said once that you liked devil's food cake," DeQuinn went on, overlooking Selby's paralysis. "I remembered because it's my favorite, too. Please thank Jenny for me. This is very sweet." DeQuinn laughed. "Well, yeah, cake. Tends to be." Selby's ears grew warm. "Oh, right. I meant..." The security guard patted him on the shoulder. "I know, Mr. Coates. I'm just messing with you." He looked around the conference room, littered with half-eaten cupcakes and empty plastic cups. "Speaking of Jenny, I'd better get moving. She'll think I've been run over by a bus or something." They shook hands, and DeQuinn made his departure. The door eased shut behind him, and Selby found himself looking at his own face reflected in the glass, the face of a small man with big ears and round, faded blue eyes, the face of a man who wasn't young anymore. Selby Coates, alone, a little drunk, holding a cupcake in a box. "Happy birthday, sir." He shook his head and looked away. Champagne and strong emotions, Selby was unaccustomed to either of these things. He rode the elevator down to the deserted lobby and then walked carefully out the front door. On the sidewalk outside, Selby opened the box to check on the cupcake as if it were a kitten or a bomb, something that had to be handled with great care. The intoxicating scent of chocolate and sugar rose from the box. Selby stepped off the curb to cross Centennial Avenue, clutching his prize and thinking about DeQuinn, thinking about the last 30 years, wondering about the next 30. Somebody shouted, and something happened. Something sudden, something huge. Pain blossomed, a riotous jungle of pain, and the world slammed into him, wild and hot, full of noise and glistening chrome teeth. As he fell, his cupcake flying out of his hands, a voice spoke in his ear, a woman's voice, husky and intimate, plunging him into stillness. Sleep, dear Selby, rest. Everything is under control. Barbara Shelley in The Gorgon from 1964, playing opposite Peter Cushing, Selby thought. What was Barbara Shelley doing talking to him in the middle of the street in front of the Herald Star? He was able to turn his head just enough to glimpse the Gorgon's face, lovely and dark, smiling. Sleep now. Like I have a choice, he thought as he turned to stone. Despite what we've led into there, that isn't the end of the story, that's just the beginning. Selby finds himself moving into a universe that he didn't know existed. His world is very, very different. And it gets to be more complicated the more he learns to understand what's going on around him. In a broad sense, that's really the most important thing about the story. Selby has to navigate this insanity that has come into his life. But at the same time, he doesn't want to lose who he is, his identity, who he's always been. He doesn't want to be disconnected from Selby. And I think that's something that everybody gets. Sooner or later, we all find ourselves in a situation that pushes us to give up some deeply rooted part of ourselves. We all deal with it in different ways. It doesn't take a near-death experience to flip the narrative. Sometimes it's just realizing that your knees aren't what they used to be, or that people you thought would be with you forever are fading out of your life, or that you've been making pie crust wrong all these years. But the effect is the same. We have to find our own way. We all have to answer the big questions, sooner or later. And for Selby, the questions are just a little more urgent. Now, speaking of questions, there's one big question that we need to get out of the way before we go anywhere else. Here we are. I'm up here, you're down there, I'm talking and you're listening. Why? Why should anybody listen to anything I have to say about writing? I don't have an MFA from Columbia. I've never written a New York Times bestseller. The Pulitzer Committee does not have me on speed dial. Who am I to offer advice? That is a valid question, and the best answer I have is to paraphrase Mark Twain. Good judgment comes from experience, and experience comes from bad judgment. Writing 3 novels has given me plenty of opportunities for bad judgment. This is a trial and error process. My first novel has 95,000 words in it, but to get to those 95,000 words, I had to write more than 250,000. What happened to the extras? Gone. Vapor. There are characters that didn't work out, scenes that didn't make sense, plot lines that just dried up without going anywhere. You just have to toss it all overboard and keep on going. There's a phrase that you hear all the time that gets some argument, but slaughter your darlings. You can't hang on to something that just isn't right for this book. So it's something you learn as you go along, and there's a lot of mistakes, a lot of crumpled up paper. You keep what works, you throw out the rest. It hurts a lot, but you get better as you go. Every word you write teaches you something, even the words that nobody will ever read. So to answer my own question, I've something to say about writing because I've done a bunch of it. I've made all the mistakes, and some of them several times. Do I still make all those mistakes? Yeah. I don't go to pieces now. I just heave a sigh and throw that page away. Hopefully, I've learned a few things that I can pass on. All right, so another question that I think is important to consider for anybody who is interested in writing, either doing it themselves or as a consumer of writing, as I'm sure all of us are here. Why do people do it? It's an incredibly lonely business. You have to lock the door, turn off the phone, put Facebook away. It's time consuming. J.D. Salinger took 10 years to write Catcher in the Rye. J.R.R. Tolkien took 17 years to write The Lord of the Rings. It's really hard work, and all the YouTube videos in the world aren't going to make it any easier. So why do we put ourselves through all that? And the reasons for writing are as different as the people who do it. Some writers, it's a process of self-examination. You're learning about yourself. No matter what you're writing, whether it's fiction or a memoir or a children's book or a cookbook, your life and your experiences are going to bleed through into everything you write. As you work, you start to get that opportunity to see yourself through different eyes. You see yourself reflected. I can't see the back of my own head, which is probably just as well. I have to have mirrors to tell me what's back there. And that's what writing is. It's a mirror that shows us those things that we can't really see if we just look straight at it. Another reason that people write is because there is a story that they think needs to be written and nobody's gotten around to it yet. There's a fantasy author named Christopher Paolini whose first novel was a dragon book called Aragon. He started writing it when he was 15 because he loved fantasy and the book he wanted to read hadn't been written yet. And a side note about Paolini and Aragon, after Aragon was published, a critic from the New York Times lambasted it, saying it was full of B-movie dialogue and awkward and gangly prose. The book spent 125 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list and has sold 25 million copies. You know, so go figure, you just don't know. And to me, the most important reason for writing is because we live in turbulent times. It's so easy to be overwhelmed by everything that's going on around us. By challenging events in our own lives, by things that are happening half a world away, we're just overwhelmed. We're also connected. We're so aware of every outrage, every death, every new insanity, minutes after it happens. That chaos leaks into every corner of our lives, and it eats away at our sense of security, at our joy, at who we are. In 1944, an 18-year-old Polish girl named Helena Wanda was arrested by the Gestapo and locked up in cell number 3 in the basement of their local headquarters in Zakopane. At some point during the 8 weeks that she spent in that cell, Helena scratched a prayer on the wall. "Oh, Mama, do not cry, no. Queen of Heaven, just stay by my side always." Those words were her way of saying, I'm here, and I'm real, I am loved, and nothing you do can change that. Words have the power to show us our world through different eyes, or even to create a new world entirely. Sometimes we need that platform, a way to stand up and say, I'm real. All of this does not diminish me. Sometimes we just need a refuge, a place to hide. Writing and reading give us that. They externalize our fears and our anxieties. They take things out of our heads and they put them here where we can step back and see them in context, get a feeling of perspective. Writing offers a promise of escape, of adventure, of self-examination, of defiance. We can build things with words and stake out our little bit of territory in the universe. We can learn things, develop a better understanding of what's happening around us, in spite of all the shouting and the noise. And I want to mention here that you hear the word escapist a lot, applied to books as a negative criticism. And to me, as both a writer and a reader, a book that offers escape is not me abdicating my responsibility to the world around me. It's a way to step outside for a little bit, to experience something new and amazing, and maybe even see the world that is in a clearer light from a different perspective. All it cost me is my time and a library card. For the writer, writing can be a treehouse in the summer, or a deck chair on the beach, or a foxhole on the battlefield. Maybe even an attic that the marching soldiers outside don't know is there. Now, assuming you haven't been completely put off by the prospect of sitting alone in a room for a certain amount of time every day, grinding away, and you'd like to write a book, where do you begin? One problem with writing fiction is that you can do whatever you want. It's your book, your world, your story, your characters. Nobody can tell you no. That sounds great, but with so much freedom, it's hard to figure out where to begin. For me, if every journey begins with a single step, every book begins with a single paragraph. So let's write a book. We're just going to start from in the middle of nowhere. The diner was surprisingly busy for 3 a.m. in the middle of nowhere. Bob sat down and ordered coffee. The waitress didn't smile. Over at the end of the counter, a fat man in a fancy suit was sobbing into his waffles. A lot of questions. Who is Bob? Any ideas? Come on. What do you think he does? Why is he on the road? Could be. Truck driver. And what about the waitress? What's up with her? Surly. Well, 3 a.m. She's probably got a 3-year-old at the babysitter's that she's got to get to. The fat guy sobbing into his waffles. There's a story there. So if we had time to work our way through these questions, we'd walk out of here with a novel. It's like that. For me, this is where a book comes from. You look at those questions and you begin searching for the answers. And you find each time you take a step forward, there's another question, and another, and another. But that leads you into the story. And that's how the story is created. When I was a kid in a small town in Alabama, one of my favorite summer weekend pastimes was walking the railroad tracks. Yeah, I was one of those kids. From the tracks, you could see the back of everything. You saw the stuff that wasn't meant for the public. The things you couldn't see from the street: broken furniture, overflowing dumpsters, abandoned kids' play sets. Whoop. Uh-oh. What did I do? Okay. So it was instructive. This was the life that people were trying to hide. So there would be days when I'd walk a mile and then another mile, and I'd get to a certain point and I'd say, when I get there, I'm going to turn around and go back. But I would get there, and there'd be a curve that would go around some trees or some rocks or a warehouse or something. And I'd think, I want to go see what's there first. I'll do that, then I'll turn back. But you get to that curve, and there's another one. And so you just keep on doing it. You keep following those curves. If I had followed enough of those curves, sooner or later I'd have ended up in New Orleans. I would have had a hard time getting somebody to come pick me up. But that's what writing a novel's like. There's always one more curve in the tracks ahead, and you just keep following where those tracks lead. You keep peeking around that next corner. And when you get to New Orleans, you write the end, and you jump to another track, start another one. And this is my way of doing this. This is not necessarily everybody's. Stephen King likes to divide authors into either pantsers or plotters. And I can hear Dorinda's teeth grinding. The term pantser, the pantser plotter terminology is kind of out of fashion right now. But I can always remember that. But it's, pantsing is just flying by the seat of your pants. And I always start out pantsing. The first chapter, the first 2 chapters, first 3 chapters, I have no idea what I'm doing, where I'm going. who these people are and why they're here and why they're doing these crazy things. What is Bob doing in that diner? Who's the fat guy and why is he so upset, publicly upset? You have to trust it, and you follow along until you start seeing that the tracks are going in certain directions, and you stop going off on the side tracks, and you start to see, no, this is the direction I'm going in, and then you can start to draw a map. You create a plot, figure out what happens next. Oops. A few minutes ago I said that there were no rules. That is not entirely true. Oh, am I still? Okay, there we go. A few minutes ago I said there were no rules. But unless you're writing for yourself alone, you're going to have to fit your work into a framework of language and culture that other people will understand. Otherwise, nobody's going to have any idea what the hell you're talking about. So yeah, there are some rules: grammar, punctuation, sentence structure, things you have to use to make your thoughts intelligible to people outside your own head. You can't start ignoring those rules until you know what they are and how they're applied. Pablo Picasso was very famous for breaking the rules. Pretty much the entire body of visual art of the last 100 years owes something to the things he did, the changes he made, the rules he broke. But Picasso's dad was an art teacher, and when Pablo was a kid, his dad would drag him off to the museum and make him copy all the great masters: Velázquez, Goya, Zurbarán, El Greco, and he had to do it accurately. He would grade the boy according to how much his picture looked like the original. Boring stuff for a kid that's going to later go on to invent analytical cubism. But before he could learn to break the rules in a meaningful way, he had to have internalized them. He had to be fluent in those rules that he was now going to ignore. James Joyce and Cormac McCarthy, they didn't develop that style out of thin air. They learned how the language worked, and then they changed it, and then they made it their own. They didn't ignore the rules. They just learned them so well that they could bend them to fit their special approach. So yeah, there are some meaningful rules, but they're not barriers, they're just guardrails to keep you from going off the embankment. There are some other rules besides grammar and comp that are a little less meaningful. For example, don't ever start your story with somebody waking up. Now, there's a novel that I love by the English author Christopher Isherwood called A Single Man. It takes place in one day. It begins with George, the main character, waking up, and it ends with him falling asleep. It's a great book, but it starts with George waking up, rolling out of bed, and staggering off to the bathroom. It could be dull, but it isn't. Another one is don't start your book with the weather. We've all heard that one. How many people are familiar with the line, "It was a dark and stormy night"? That is the first sentence in a novel from 1833 by Edward Bulwer-Lytton called Paul Clifford. None of us are familiar with that novel, I'm sure. It's a terrible book. But that was 200 years ago, and we all know his opening line, which is about the weather, the thing you're not supposed to do. So maybe that rule is flexible. Another one is make your characters relatable. This is one I have a lot of trouble with personally. Basically, that just means make your characters people that the reader can identify with on some level. But what do you do with Wuthering Heights, Gone with the Wind, Lolita? I mean, people like Kathy and Heathcliff or Scarlett and Rhett or Humbert, they're awful people, dreadful, self-involved, manipulative people, but those are great books. Whether you like anybody in there or not. So yeah, there's really only one rule that sticks and survives the test of time, and that is put words down on the page. The only way to be a writer is to write. C.S. Lewis was once asked in an interview what he thought was the most important tool for any writer, and he said, butt glue. And this is the moral adhesive that keeps your butt on the chair long enough to get the work done. There we go. Which leads me to something that I had never considered when I first started writing, which is my age. Writing a novel is very time-consuming. On the average, it takes me about a year to get a solid first draft. Then the first draft goes to an editor. If you can afford one, if not, it goes to a friend that you can trust who can spot your mistakes, fix your grammar. And then besides the editor, you're going to have beta readers. And these are just people, friends, family members, people that you trust who like to read. You give them the book and say, read this and tell me what you think. And you're not looking for grammar or stylistic questions. You're looking for, did you get it? Did the plot make sense? Did you like these characters? Did you hate them? Did I describe the setting enough? It's general stuff. But by the time all of that has happened, another year has gone by. And then once you've gotten all your feedback together, you got to make a choice. Are you going to self-publish, or are you going to send it off to an agent? And there are pros and cons for both. If you're going to send it to an agent, you're going to send it to a bunch of agents, chances are, 20, 30, 50, 100, until you get somebody that says, yeah, I think I'm interested in this. And then you're going to go through a process with her, and then she's going to take it to publishers and go through the whole thing over again, one by one by one, trying to find a publisher who is interested in what you've done. So, and then once there's a publisher, you may have another editor on the scene. So you may be doing a lot of rewriting. So another year goes by, 2 years. Now, self-publishing you can do in minutes, but you don't have all of that machinery that is helping make your book a better book. So you have to decide, how important is that, or how can I substitute other things? You know, how can I drag all my friends in and make them help me with this book to do the things that would normally be happening with an agent or a publisher or a professional editor. And for me, the question of self-publishing versus traditional publishing, my age was a factor, because I thought, I don't want to wait 4 years to find out my book is not publishable. So I went with self-publishing because it's quicker. But that said, there are a lot of writers, great writers, who published their books late in life. Raymond Chandler, who is the author, the creator of my favorite hard-boiled detective, Philip Marlowe, he wrote his very first novel, The Big Sleep, at age 51. It was the middle of the Great Depression. He had just lost his job. He wanted to do something where he could sit around the house and drink bourbon all day, and writing was just really a great option. So he wrote The Big Sleep, and if you haven't seen the movie version with Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall, it's kind of a hot mess, but it's great fun, and they have it here on DVD. Richard Adams was 52 when he wrote Watership Down, his first novel. Nobody wanted to publish it. It was a novel for adults whose main characters are all rabbits. Nobody could make sense of that. Finally, a publisher said, this is ridiculous, it's insane, but I'll give it a try. And I think everybody's read Watership Down at some point or another. Laura Ingalls Wilder was 65 when she wrote Little House on the Prairie. Frank McCourt was 66 when he wrote his first book, Angela's Ashes, which won a Pulitzer Prize. I'll get the hang of this by the time we get to the end. Okay, that's the time factor. But one plus thing about writing is it doesn't take a lot of stuff. You don't have to have a dedicated workshop to do it in. You don't have to go out and buy a piano or $200 sneakers. Your knees don't have to work really well. You can kind of make do with whatever you've got. I do my writing on a refurbished Dell computer with a free operating system on it, using a free alternative to Microsoft Word, and keeping all my notes on a free application called Obsidian, because I'm cheap. But you don't need to have, you can't buy your book from from Amazon or Newegg or Best Buy. You've got to do the book. Those tools are just tools, and that's it. That's all they are. All you really need is something to write with and something to write on. Now, when I get started with a novel, what I will do is what I've described. I'll find a place to start. It'll be Selby getting run over by the bus. It'll be Bob in the diner. I'll fool around with that. I'll write, 10,000 words, none of which are going to make it into the final product, but just feeling my way around in the dark, trying to figure out where is this book going? Is there a book here? And at some point something clicks and I get up and run around the room waving my arms. And that's the first curve. Does Bob check into a motel down the highway and discover that the fat man is occupying the second room down? Or does he drive all night, veering and wandering, desperate to arrive? We don't know. What's around that next curve? So that's what I do. I write a chapter, then another, and maybe a couple more, and then I throw away half of that, and then I fill in with something else, and it kind of comes together. It's a lot like carving a statue of Michelangelo's David out of a hunk of marble. You're going to throw away a lot because you have to chip away everything that isn't that figure of a shepherd boy. It's useful to take notes, but you don't want to start with note-taking. At some point, if I'm writing the Bob book, there's going to be a point where I'm going to think, how old is Bob? Because that might have an impact on how he relates to the waitress. So I'll make a note. He's this old. What does he look like? Is he wearing a nice suit? Because maybe that's going to affect the way he's dealing with the people around him. So that's a part of the process. It's world building, I guess. And when we use that word, mostly talking about fantasy, but I think any piece of fiction, you've got world building. You're creating or recreating a world for yourself and for your characters. And you need to keep track. If Bob has green eyes and a scar on his chin in chapter 3, you need to be really sure he doesn't have brown eyes and a scar on his forehead in chapter 17. Because readers are gonna pick that up. And you have to understand who your characters are, who they want to be. Your surly waitress gets off her shift. She goes, picks her daughter up at the neighbor who takes care of her. Gets home, there's a storm. Storm comes, power's flickering. She puts the baby to bed. Power goes out. She hears noises in the basement. Weird animal noises, something clawing at the other side of the basement door. Now, you could have a really interesting scene there by having her go get a candle and go down those stairs to investigate. But she wouldn't do that. She's got a job, she's got a child, she's got a house. She's not stupid. She's gonna go grab that kid and get the hell out of the house. So you can't force your character into something that isn't right for that character, something that character just would not do. So that's always important to make sure that you respect your character's integrity. Because if you don't, readers will get that. They'll realize, oh, this character just does whatever. It's, who is this person? And you will get to a point somewhere down the line where you start to see the end shimmering off in the distance. And that's the really scary part, because at that point you have to start working with a plot. You know, the story has suddenly is going somewhere now, and you have to go with it. And that's the hardest part, the saggy middle of every book. It's that point where you get to where you can't just play anymore. You've got work to do, and you've got to focus, and it gets tough. And that's the slow part, and that's the part where you write 2 sentences in one day and get up the next morning and delete one of them. Whoops. I knew this would be an issue that I would forget to click the clicker, but now I'm going to open everything up to you guys, but first I want to read, I'm going to ask you to indulge me a little bit more. I'm going to read a little bit from my current work in progress novel. The short title is The Apocryphon, but it's Apocryphon, Bishop Barclay's Book of Secrets. And this is just chapter 1. The happy little man in the butterscotch suit keeps twisting in his seat to smile at me. He's an aging cherub with dimples and a neat goatee. When he turns back around to face the front of the train, I see a thinning patch at the crown of his head, a haze of honey-colored skin showing through the pepper and salt hair. He's chatting with the person next to him, a stern-looking woman, 50-ish, wearing an old-fashioned dress of some satiny midnight blue fabric. Are they traveling together? Not necessarily. Unlike me, I'm sure he's the sort of person who can talk to anybody. There's a traveling shade a few rows back, a short, skinny man in a mask of ivory, silver wire, and gauze covering his head like a helmet. He goes to the bathroom a lot, thumping and bumping his way up and down the aisle. I've heard shades usually run in packs, but this one is alone. I'm sorry, he says when he stumbles into the back of my seat. I'm a terrible traveler. This would be a good time to say something clever about a traveling shade who doesn't travel, but the words don't come together in time, and all I do is smile. I hope he's smiling back somewhere underneath his mask. I'll bet he's lonely traveling solo like this. We're all lonely sometimes. The shade nods once and continues on his way up the aisle. I go back to watching the scenery rush by. The landscape we're passing through is dry, but there are splashes of green here and there, spots where somebody is irrigating a water-intensive crop or a grassy lawn. An expensive proposition, all that green. My father says this whole territory used to be woods and pastures, wall-to-wall vegetation. He says a lot of things about his childhood that I have trouble believing. Swimming pools, he says, remembering. Golf courses. Florida. It's just crazy talk. An olive grove slithers down across the dry hills to run alongside the train for a while. A man on a small tractor flashes by, his hat as round and yellow as a sunflower. There's a dusty water tower and a small windmill rush to catch up. What's life like for the little brown man in his cheerful hat? Halfway between here and there. The child I used to be wants to get off the train and ask the farmer about the opportunities for adventure in the windmill's shadow. The adult I've become has other priorities. Look, kid, I'm sorry, I tell that frustrated child. There's something we have to do first. Seems like there's always something we have to do first. The train is not crowded. I've got 2 seats all to myself, a lumpy expanse of worn fabric and a sporty green and blue plaid. If I turn my head to the side, I can smell lavender-scented cleaner, but also a hint of something else. Eagerness, anxiety, lives in transition. I brought a book to read, a tourist guidebook, but it's in my duffel bag somewhere else on the train, wherever the suitcases go. All I have with me is my satchel, and all it contains is Bishop Barclay's Apocryphon, 410 pages of madness. I'll just look out the window and count the buzzards, thank you. The happy little man turns my way once more, dimples dancing in his round face. We look at each other, and he gives me a friendly nod before resuming his conversation with the woman in blue. Why does he keep looking at me? He behaves as if we were complicit, partners in some adventure, players in an exciting game. Maybe we are. What are the rules? Is there a prize? What happens if I lose? Dad has always liked the term proactive. He believes you should meet life head-on, with your eyes open and your tools sharp. He digs in and hauls the universe in the direction he wants it to go. Me, I stagger down the pavement just ahead of the wheels, looking for a clear spot in a ditch to tumble into before I get run over. What am I doing on this train? Tell me, Dad, what the hell am I doing? Reacting, says that version of him I carry around with me everywhere. Like always, you're waiting until you have no choices left, then letting events shove you around. He shakes his head, takes his glasses off and polishes them, looking at me through his naked eyes. This always feels strange, as though I'm the one who's naked. Nothing to be done about it now, he says. You're here, Sammy. Commit. Do what you think you have to. Okay, Dad, I knew you'd say that, but thanks. The object I'm carrying has a nasty reputation, but it's also magic. There's a terrible excitement in all this. My life hasn't involved much excitement up to this point. But no, this is not my job, my area of expertise. I'll just screw things up. All I need to do is transport the Apocryphon to somebody smarter than I am, somebody who can take it off my hands. This much I can do without fucking it up. I'm not running away from disaster, Dad. This time I'm running away with it. This is me being proactive. The happy little man gets up to go to the bathroom, and I can't help but notice how he interacts with people as he passes. A smile, a few words, a nod. Everybody responds. They nod back. They smile. This, too, is magic. We pass a little town, a few buildings clustered around a central square and a scattering of homes beyond. There's no platform. The train slows but doesn't stop. 3 children, small, medium, and large, walk along the dusty dirt road that runs parallel to the track. The largest child, a girl in a plain print dress like something out of the 19th century, is holding the hand of the smallest as they walk. The middle child, a boy, barefoot and hyper, with a wide face and a goopy, gap-toothed smile, waves at the train with both hands. My vision blurs, and the knot in my chest climbs up into my throat. Come on. There we go. Well, and that's it. It is now your turn. Ask questions. There are no foolish questions. Ask me things. Be brave.
Could you pinpoint a time in your writing where you decided that you were no longer afraid?
Well, it hasn't happened yet. John asked if I had reached a point in my writing, I could pinpoint the point in my writing at which I had stopped being afraid. And I'm not there. You're always going to be a little afraid because every project is new, every project is different, and you're going to face different challenges. So you think, okay, I did this, I got through this, everything was fine, let's start the next one. Oh my God, it's completely different. What do I do now? So you never stop being afraid.
Can you pinpoint the time that you started to own the identity of being a writer?
Yes. Dorinda asked if I could pinpoint the time at which I decided that I was, in fact, a writer. And I owe this to Crescent Dragon Wagon. I was in a conversation with her online and some other people. And at some point, she went to introduce me to someone, to the other people. And she said, oh, this is David Holcomb. He's a novelist. And I was like, oh my God. Because I had never applied that word to me before. But that was kind of a cool thing. That was where I could look at it and say, okay, we're there. So, I mean, you shouldn't have to rely on somebody outside yourself to do that, but sometimes it helps to have somebody give you a little nudge. Dan?
Dave, do the same rules apply to writing nonfiction as fiction, maybe on a biographical level?
Yeah, Dan asked if the same rules apply to nonfiction as fiction, and they do. A lot of them do, because if you look at a nonfiction book, I read a lot of history books. And there are some historians that you read for pleasure because of the way they write the story, the way they show you the people. There are others you read for the facts. It's more like reportage. So you're always going to have those subtleties, those rules that you need to break or follow or maneuver around. And you're always going to have a vested community of people who do that type of writing, who are going to say, oh, no, 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 you shouldn't do this. And if you look around, you'll always find that one person whose book is really good who does that. So yeah, it's pretty much the same thing. I think virtually everything I said here, in a lot of ways, could still apply to nonfiction, even the things like all of the false starts. Because if you're writing a history of Byzantium, my favorite, there's an awful lot of stuff. I mean, there's just, if you've ever looked at Gibbon's Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, it just goes on for volume after volume after volume. And you never, no, I don't know if anybody's ever gotten all the way through it. So the same rules apply. You have to look at it and say, I've got to cut this. This is a sidetrack. I'm going to have to take this out. I love it. It's a great sidetrack. It's fascinating. But if I keep it, we're never going to get to the end of this book.
So you can embellish nonfiction just the same?
You can, as long as you respect. With fiction, you have to respect your characters. You have to respect your setting. With nonfiction, you have to respect your subject matter. If you're going to embellish, it needs to be in a way that is not altering the substance of what you're writing about. If you've got a character, some outlaw who has a great reputation for being an outlaw and is fascinating, then it's okay to make him fascinating because he lived that way. But if you're just sort of lathering that on to somebody who isn't like that, or for whom you have no evidence, then you may be pushing the envelope. So it's the same thing. It's the integrity of your characters, your settings, the story you're telling. You've got to always respect that integrity, whether it's fiction or nonfiction or poetry or any kind of writing. You've always got to treat what you're doing with integrity because you're their God. You're creating these characters in this story. So you've got to behave in a responsible way. You can't be nobody wants to see a frat boy, crypto bro God. So same idea.
How has your approach for your process developed for each book?
How has my process developed for each book? That's a very good question because it has changed a lot. The first novel, I planned things. I had an arbitrary approximate page length for chapters, and I would tweak content to make it fit. I was very much trying to write a certain type of book that would look a certain way and would read a certain way. By the time I got to the second book, I had decided that I didn't like being boxed in that way. So the second book was more just a story, starting from point A and progressing with some flashbacks here and there. The first book was multiple timelines, different characters in different places. And it was ambitious. I am proud of the way it came out, but I think since then I've realized I would rather tell the story. I'd rather paint the picture than have to keep trying to track down, what happened. Okay, so, Bob is on the run right now because of something his grandmother did, and we're going to go flash back to his grandmother's time and follow her story for a while. That's great, and I would love to be able to do that, but I think it can wear you out. So I've kind of whittled it down to where I'm much more inclined to just tell the story. Now, Apocryphon, on the other hand, starts to go back the other way again. I do have the first third of the book basically is giving you all the backstory plus part of the scene up to a certain critical point. So it's a little complicated, but I feel like I can do that now because I've done 2 books that are just a story, started at the beginning and ended at the end, and one that's all over the place, and so I can pick and choose what works. And I think that's the thing too, is that it's all trial and error. You can never sit down and say, I need to do this way, because it might work, but it might not. That may not be the appropriate approach to the book you're trying to write. So you have to be prepared to lay out some guidelines, but then start trampling on them. Anybody else?
What is the premise of your next book?
Oh my God. I was afraid somebody would ask that. It is fantasy, a little science fiction. It takes place, most of the story takes place on a parallel Earth. It's set about 30 plus years into the future. There is a book, the Apocryphon, which I start with history in this one. Bishop George Berkeley is a real character. He was a real person. He was the Bishop of Cloyne in Ireland at the end of the 18th century. And he had some very interesting ideas. And he was also somebody who enjoyed talking to his parishioners. So I invent a character who he meets when he comes into the parish. And this guy has a story that he comes from somewhere else with a capital E. And all he brought with him was a book. And that book is the reason that he was thrown into our earth. And that's the Apocryphon. The book has no name at that point. But it seems to be just full of gibberish and weird alphabets and weird languages. And so when Bishop Berkeley retires, his successor sends all this stuff off to he calls it his book of secrets, and shows it to people when they visit. But the book goes through a series of hands, and really awful things happen to people a lot of the time when they own the book or they try to find meaning in it. And by the time we get to where this book is happening, there's been a cosmic, cataclysmic event where our Earth and this alternate Earth have become connected. You can get on a train anywhere on Earth and travel west. And if you buy the right ticket at the right stopping point, you're not going to end up in Pittsburgh or Omaha. You're going to end up in Palisade. And so there's this connection now. And my character Lynch realizes that the book is this is what's happening. The book is from there. And Lynch believes that the blink, the incident that changed the world when he was born, was caused by the book, trying to create a link back to where it belonged, to get somebody to get it home. And every time somebody didn't, it did horrible things to them. So Lynch has the book and is taking the book to Palisade, hoping to find the people it belongs to and return it to them before something even more awful happens, and especially to him. So Lynch is a bibliologist, somebody who studies books, not the contents of books, but books as artifacts, as objects. Lynch has dyslexia and can't read very well. So this is a person who makes a living out of books, but struggles to read, and who is now saddled with a book that quite possibly could end the world, and is in this strange place. And Palisade is like some parts of Earth, but it's different. There's some of the basic rules are different. And there are a lot of odd cults and organizations that run around that Lynch has to interact with. I say he. In the book, I never actually gender Lynch. I didn't in the first few chapters because it's told in first person. And there was never any reason. People don't walk around going, I am a guy, in their head. So Lynch never bothered. And then by the time I got 20,000 words in, it's like, well, crap. Now it's really too late. It's like meeting somebody at a party and not getting their name. And then, 3 months later, you've seen them at every party you've been to, and you chat, and you're great pals, and you still don't know the name. That was kind of the way I felt with Lynch, trying to decide, is this a guy or a girl? I don't know.
Is Lynch Sammy? Is that
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And are we supposed to know how old they are?
Yes, I think it's fairly explicitly stated. Lynch was born the day the blink happened. There's a prologue where Lynch's parents they've taken their little girl to stay with friends, and Caitlin is ready to drop a baby at any moment. And Caitlin is a college professor. She's a news junkie. She is terminally online. And she's talking about the fact that this book has been stolen from the Emir of Qatar's vault. And, her husband's like, what, a book? Why would they steal a book? And then her tablet freezes. And then before they follow up with that, she starts having a contraction. So he bundles her off. They leave the house, and the tablet makes a funny noise, and all the lights go off. And that's the blink kicking in. And what the blink does is it eliminates all forms of information processing or storage that are not physical. So you can talk on an old-fashioned telephone through a wire, but you've got to have a switchboard with somebody unplugging and plugging. Planes fall out of the sky. Medical equipment stops. 1 billion people die, mostly in the northern hemisphere, because we're really dependent on our tech. But the world recovers during Lynch's lifetime, slowly but surely. And you end up with a kind of world that's a little bit 1920, a little bit 1950, a little bit 1970. But it's all Lynch has ever known, so they don't really think about that. So we know that Lynch is right at 30.
You read about your first paragraph?
That's the first chapter, yeah. That is, the book begins with Lynch on the train, and then we do that, and then we go back in time to Lynch meeting the person who is going to ultimately give him that book. And those scenes alternate. So
When you wrote the first paragraph, did you have any idea?
No, all I had was the happy little man. I mean, that phrase came to me, and I thought, the happy little man. The happy little man keeps turning around to look at me, and I thought, well, where are we for that to be happening? A movie theater? No.
And then you got the train.
A train just seemed like a good place for it, and everything just developed from there. And Lynch's father, the voice in his head, I thought, who doesn't have that? That's me being relatable. All right. Anything else? That it? Well, thank you all very, very much for coming, and thank the library people for being so encouraging and so gracious. This is my way of getting around the whole process of writing a book, being sitting in a room by yourself all day.
Well, those authors don't say nearly as much about what they do and how it works.
Well, I couldn't have done it. I couldn't have done this before I started this fourth book, I think, because I just didn't have the ideas clear. But I think by the time I got to this, I'd started to see, oh, I'm doing this again, or this is happening again. Yeah, and I started to, again, it's like holding up a mirror. It's like I started seeing myself and going, oh, I'm doing that thing again. Well, thank you all. And, do fill out the things and just leave them in the basket there next to Kathy. Any that aren't used, I'll collect them and fill them out and